Hey everyone, Tyler here. In this video, I want to compare two of the most accurate lights that I have ever used, and that is the iFootage Anglerfish 200 BNA, which is a brand new light, and the Amaran 200 XS, which has been out for a little bit longer. And the reason why I wanted to compare these two is because, number one, like they're priced very similarly, and they have very similar specs and output and all that, and they're both extremely accurate with really high SSI scores, and the build quality and everything is very similar. So I feel like these two are really good to compare against each other. And in this video, hopefully this will help you kind of make a more informed purchasing decision whether or not you want to go with the iFootage or the Amaran. And whichever you decide, I will have links in the description below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it's an affiliate link, so it just kind of helps this channel out and helps this channel grow. So that said, what I did is I used the Sekonic C800, which huge thanks to B&H for lending this out to me. Honestly, this video would not have been possible had they not been able to support me support this channel. So huge thank you to B&H. Now, the Sekonic C800, basically what it does is takes really accurate measurements. This is like the industry standard for getting your color temperature and all that kind of stuff. And I use this to kind of collect all the data for this video, getting measurements at 5500 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin and some other data sprinkled throughout. So that's what I want to do. I just kind of want to compare these two lights and kind of do an apples to apples comparison. When I did the measurements and everything, it was 1 meter away, and I used the same light stand. I just took one light off, put the other light on, and set this up on a stand. You can see from this B-roll right here. So that said, let's go ahead and start off at 5500 Kelvin. So the iFootage at 5500 Kelvin at 100% with the reflector, I was getting a reading of 5601 Kelvin, whereas the Amaran, I was getting 5513 Kelvin. The delta UV was, in my opinion, insignificantly higher than the Amaran, so honestly, not really a big deal there. TM30 was actually higher on the iFootage, but the SSI you can see was definitely higher on the Amaran with a score of 88. And the foot candle I actually wanted to put with the reflector and without the reflector. With the reflector with the iFootage, it was actually lower than the Amaran, but without the reflector, just the bare bulb, was actually higher. So what that tells me is the Amaran's reflector probably has more of a hot spot in the middle than on the iFootage, and I used the reflectors that came with each of the lights to kind of keep it as apples to apples comparison. Now shifting over to 3200 Kelvin, you can say they're basically within 10 degrees of each other. Honestly, that's insignificant, so that is pretty much spot on with regards to CCT. The delta UV on the iFootage, so that basically what that's saying is it leans a little bit more magenta than the Amaran. The color render 97 on the iFootage, 98, so really high scores with both of those. And with SSI, the Amaran is just ever so slightly higher. And then again, with the foot candle, you can see there is a big jump between the Amaran and the iFootage with the reflector on. But when I take that reflector off, you can see that the iFootage is actually a little bit brighter than the Amaran. So that was a comparison at 100%, but real quick, I just wanted to show you each light individually at different outputs so we can kind of take a look at some of the things, because there's some things that I actually found that were really interesting. So first off, with the iFootage at 5500 Kelvin, a couple of things that really stuck out to me is the lower the output that you go, the cooler the light gets. All the way up to like at 10%, I was getting a reading of 6365 Kelvin, and the delta UV kind of followed that same trajectory in the sense that it started to shift more towards green the lower the output it got. The SSI score only drops to 80. And the other thing that was interesting was the foot candle. From 10% to 1% wasn't as linear as I was expecting it to be compared to how the rest of the intensities show. The big takeaway at 5500 Kelvin with the iFootage is that increase in CCT the lower the output gets. And if you're just using this light at full output, it's not really a big deal. But if you are in a scenario where you have no windows to deal with and you're just working with really low intensities, then you're going to start to see that shift in CCT and that shift slightly towards green. Now, when we switch over to 3200 Kelvin, it starts to look a lot better. The delta UV scores are pretty consistent among all the different intensities, and same with the CCT readings, all the same except at 1%, it jumped up to 3764, which I found pretty surprising. And the SSI dropped significantly at 1% compared to even at 10% being 88. And the same story of the output, between 10% and 1%, I would have expected there to be a lower foot candle number there at 1%. Now the Amaran 200XS at 5500 Kelvin is a different story. You're seeing very consistent readings from 100% all the way down to 1% with regards to CCT. The only substantial difference in the delta UV is at 1%, and the SSI does drop from 88 to 82. Now, if you take a look at the foot candle readings here, you can see at 1% is 40.3 foot candles, and 10% is at 545 foot candles. So a little bit more of a linear drop as opposed to what was found on the iFootage. And then at 3200 Kelvin, kind of the same story as we were seeing with 5500 Kelvin with regards to pretty consistent reading of the CCT, and the change of delta UV was pretty consistent with what we saw at 5500 Kelvin. And the SSI didn't drop significantly at 1% from the 92 at 100%. All right, next up, I just measured the CCT at different settings on the lights. And what you can see here is Amaran was pretty consistent all the way down the line, with the largest deviation at 6500 Kelvin, where it measured at 6400 Kelvin. Now the iFootage was really accurate up until about 5000 Kelvin, and then past that, it started to read much higher than what the actual setting was on the light. And then the last thing I did was I just measured with the Light Dome 3 attached, because most of the time we're not using a light with just the reflector dish, we're actually using the light with a softbox, because that's usually how we wanna light our face or light a talent or something. And what I found here was the iFootage and the Amaran honestly were pretty doggone close at 5200 Kelvin. This is the Light Dome 3 with the 2-stop diffusion on. So what that tells me is that warmed up the light just a little bit. For all intents and purposes, like, I would say that's pretty much the same reading. And the CCT correction, delta UV, in real world, the difference is insignificant. And then from output, you have 484 foot candle versus 368 foot candle. Probably the bigger difference for this is the SSI, which was 82 on the iFootage and 87 on the Amaran. So I thought this was an interesting measurement to take with the softbox on, because this is how most people are going to use it. And what this tells me is between the two lights at 100% output, the difference is pretty negligible, with a slight edge towards the Amaran with the higher SSI score, but otherwise they're pretty similar. And that's kind of like how I would sum up the comparison between these lights. At 100%, I would say they are pretty neck and neck with regards to like their SSI scores and all of like the important stuff. Where the Amaran really starts to come ahead is when you get down to like lower intensities. You know, if you're working in between like, you know, 1 to 25 to 30%, then at least the time recording this, I would say the iFootage is probably not the light you should get, simply because of that huge spike in CCT and that shift towards green at the lower intensities. It was something that I could actually see like with the naked eye. I didn't even have to measure it. So that's enough for me to want to kind of stick with the Amaran 200XS at the lower intensities. But that could be something. I don't know if the shift towards green could necessarily be fixed, but the CCT could possibly be fixed with the firmware update. I'm not sure if that is possible, but if it is and they do correct it, then that completely changes the conversation, and I think that kind of levels the playing field out even more between these two lights. If you have a lot of lights in the Amaran or Aperture ecosystem and you're using Sidus Link, then it doesn't make sense to get the iFootage. But if you don't really have any Amaran lights or any other Aperture lights or whatever, and you're just like, I just want to get one or the other, then the iFootage is a good option, considering that you're going to stay at that higher intensity, that higher output for your light. Otherwise, I think they're very similar lights. They're similarly priced. The build quality is pretty much the same. I don't really see any differences between the build quality. So it really boils down to what intensities you plan on using the most, these lights, and also what ecosystem that you are already in. So other than that, I think they are very good lights. I would recommend both of them with those considerations in mind. And yeah, if you are considering purchasing either one of them, then use the links down in the description below. It definitely helps this channel out and doesn't cost you anything extra. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna wrap this up. Appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the comments. Peace.